Blood stained the fresh snow crimson near the edge of the ravine. The golden eagle known as Shadow had witnessed many deaths in these mountains, but this one made her razor-sharp talons grip the ancient pine branch even tighter. Below, a massive grizzly bear lay motionless, her body broken from what must have been a desperate struggle with a mountain lion. The tracks told a tragic story, but it was the sound that pierced the crisp mountain air that made Shadow's predator heart falter. The cries were faint at first, almost lost in the howling wind that whipped through the Rocky Mountains. 3 distinct voices, small and desperate, echoed from somewhere beneath the towering cliffs. Shadow's keen eyes, capable of spotting a mouse from 1,000 feet above, scanned the treacherous terrain. The wails grew weaker with each passing moment, a sound that spoke of innocence facing death. Most eagles would have ignored these cries, continuing their hunt for rabbits or fish in the streams below. But Shadow was different. 20 seasons of ruling these skies had taught her that sometimes nature's laws could be bent, if not broken. As she glided lower, riding the thermal currents, the source of those haunting cries became clear. Huddled in a small cave carved into the cliff face, 3 tiny bear cubs lay trembling, their black fur dusted with snow. Their eyes were barely open to the harsh world they had been born into. They were no larger than the mountain hares Shadow usually hunted, yet something about their helpless forms struck a chord deep within her warrior soul. Without their mother, they would not survive the brutal mountain night that approached. The temperature was already plummeting, and hungry wolves had begun their evening songs in the valleys below. Shadow faced a choice that defied everything she knew about the natural order. Eagles and bears were ancient enemies, their territories separate, their paths crossing only in conflict. Yet as the sun began to sink behind the snow-capped peaks, painting the world in blood-red hues, Shadow made a decision that would shake the very foundations of what was thought possible in these remote mountains. The cubs' cries grew weaker, their small bodies huddling closer together for warmth. Time was running out, and in that moment, as storm clouds gathered ominously overhead, Shadow spread her magnificent wings and did something no eagle had ever done before. That first night beneath Shadow's wings changed everything. The 3 tiny cubs pressed against her feathers, their cries softening into gentle whimpers as her warmth kept death at bay. Shadow remained awake through the endless hours, her fierce eyes scanning the darkness for any threat that might approach her newfound family. By dawn, she had made a silent promise to protect these little ones, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The first month tested every limit of Shadow's ingenuity. She quickly learned that each cub had different needs. Storm, the largest, was always hungry, requiring Shadow to make twice as many hunting trips to the river. His appetite drove him to try solid food first, eagerly tearing at the fish Shadow brought back. Mist, more cautious and gentle, preferred to wait for Shadow to break the fish into smaller pieces. Echo, the smallest, struggled the most in those early days, requiring Shadow to find especially tender morsels. As spring turned to summer, Shadow discovered that raising bear cubs required more than just providing food. She had to teach them about the mountain itself. When thunder rolled through the valleys, the cubs would tremble in terror. Shadow learned to spread her wings over them, letting them feel how she stayed calm even when lightning split the sky. Gradually, they began to mimic her stillness, learning that fear could be mastered. Their first steps outside the cave became lessons in courage. Shadow would stand at the entrance, making soft eagle calls to encourage them forward. Storm always ventured out first, his curiosity overcoming his fear. Mist would follow carefully, testing each step. Echo, though hesitant, would scramble after the others, unwilling to be left behind. Each small victory, from climbing their first rock to drinking from the stream, was celebrated with gentle nuzzles against Shadow's feathers. Most remarkable was how they began to observe and learn from their eagle mother. When Shadow would turn her head to listen to distant sounds, the cubs would do the same, their ears twitching as they learned to recognize the different voices of the mountain. They watched how she used the wind, feeling how it changed direction before storms. Without realizing it, they were learning to perceive the world as both bear and eagle. By the time autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, the cubs had grown into sturdy young bears with a unique way of moving through their world. They stayed low to the ground like bears, but their heads were often lifted to the sky, watching their mother soar above. Other animals began to notice something different about these three. The way they paused to feel the wind, how they seemed to communicate with subtle movements learned from watching eagles, and most surprisingly, how they would make soft calling sounds remarkably similar to their eagle mother's cry. What no one could know then was that these early days of learning and love were laying the foundation for something extraordinary. As winter approached and the cubs grew stronger, Shadow sensed that their unique bond was just the beginning of a miracle that would unfold in ways none could imagine. 2 winters had passed in the Rocky Mountains, each season bringing remarkable changes to Shadow's unusual family. Storm, Mist, and Echo had grown into young bears of exceptional size and strength. Their muscles hardened by climbing the highest peaks alongside their eagle mother. Yet it was not their physical growth that made other animals stop and stare in wonder. It was something far more extraordinary. The 3 bears moved through the mountain world with an awareness that seemed impossible for creatures of their size. When avalanches threatened distant slopes, they would pause and lift their heads to the wind, reading the air currents just as Shadow had taught them. Their massive forms would grow still, heads tilted slightly, before they began guiding other bears away from danger paths. The mountain goats learned to watch these strange bears, following their lead when storms approached. Storm had grown into a towering figure, his black fur gleaming with hints of silver in the sunlight. He had developed an uncanny ability to predict weather changes, often standing on high ridges with his face to the wind, making soft eagle-like sounds that echoed through the valleys. Younger bears would gather at a safe distance, watching in amazement as he communicated with the eagles circling overhead. Mist, true to her name, had mastered the art of moving silently through the morning fogs. She became known among the mountain creatures as the Gentle Guardian, often spotted helping injured animals find shelter during storms. Her favorite perch was a flat rock overlooking the river, where she would sit beside Shadow, both of them watching the water with identical focus, sharing a connection that defied nature itself. Echo, though still the smallest, had developed abilities that left even Shadow amazed. He could mimic the eagle's warning cry so perfectly that other birds would respond to his calls. On quiet evenings, he would sit with his siblings and create sounds that seemed to bridge the gap between bear and eagle, a haunting melody that carried through the mountain air. As their second year drew to a close, signs of change began appearing in the mountains. The winds carried new scents, and the clouds gathered in unusual patterns. Shadow sensed something approaching, something that would test everything she had taught her children. The other eagles felt it too, growing restless in their nests, their calls more urgent than usual. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in deep crimson, Shadow perched on their favorite cliff edge with her 3 bears beside her. They had grown so large that their mother now seemed small in comparison, yet they still looked to her for guidance. Storm, Mist, and Echo sat in perfect stillness, their eyes focused on the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. They could not know that everything they had learned, every unique skill they had developed under Shadow's care, was about to be tested in a way that would reveal just how miraculous their bond had become. 2 years to the day after Shadow found those crying cubs, something extraordinary occurred in the Rocky Mountains. Storm, Mist, and Echo had grown into young adult bears, but they were unlike any bears the wilderness had ever known. They remained close to Shadow, never straying far from their eagle mother's watchful gaze. On this particular morning, Shadow swooped down to her usual perch, but something was wrong. Her wing was injured, likely from a battle with another eagle protecting her territory. She tried to fly but stumbled, falling toward the jagged rocks below. What happened next left even the oldest animals in the mountains speechless. The 3 bears, who had been watching their mother's flight as they did every morning, immediately sprang into action. Instead of running on all fours as bears typically do, they moved with an uncanny grace, their bodies low to the ground, understanding the wind currents just as Shadow had taught them. Storm positioned himself beneath Shadow's falling form, while Mist and Echo rushed to higher points on the ridge. Then came the sound that changed everything. The 3 bears raised their heads and called out, not with a bear's roar, but with a perfect eagle's cry. It was the same cry they had made as cubs, but now it carried power and purpose. The sound echoed through the mountains, carrying for miles. Other eagles, hearing the familiar call, began arriving one by one. They recognized these bears, known throughout the territory as Shadow's children. What followed was beyond anything the mountain had ever witnessed. The bears worked in perfect harmony with the eagles, creating a protective circle around their injured mother. They understood flight patterns and wind currents so well that they could guide the eagles to create air currents that helped Shadow glide safely to the ground. But the true miracle came in the days that followed. The three bears stayed by Shadow's side as she healed, and something remarkable began to happen. Other injured eagles, who would normally hide away in their nests, started coming to the bears for help. Storm, Mist, and Echo could sense where wings were broken, using their gentle strength to help hold injured eagles while they recovered. They became bridges between the ground and sky, healing the ancient divide between bears and eagles. The incredible thing that happened 2 years after Shadow found those crying cubs wasn't just about saving their mother. It was about changing the very nature of the mountains themselves. These bears became guardians of both earth and sky, earning the trust of creatures who had been enemies for generations. Their unique ability to communicate with eagles, born from their early days as crying cubs under Shadow's wing, created a new kind of harmony in the wilderness. Word spread throughout the Rocky Mountains of the bears, who spoke to eagles, who understood the language of the sky, yet remained firmly connected to the earth. Shadow's decision to help 3 crying cubs had not only saved their lives, but had created something entirely new in the natural world, a family that bridged the gap between ground and air, between bear and bird, between what was possible and impossible. One crisp autumn morning, 5 years after Shadow first discovered those crying cubs, the mountain air carried a familiar sound through the valleys. A lone bear cub's cry echoed off the rocky walls, its fear and desperation touching something deep in the hearts of Storm, Mist, and Echo. They had been tending to an injured golden eagle in their healing cave when the sound reached them, stirring memories of their own beginning. Shadow, perched on her favorite outcrop, gave a gentle cry. Her children, now massive adult bears with healing powers that had become legendary throughout the Rockies, understood immediately. This was a moment of destiny, a chance to complete the circle that had begun with their own rescue years ago. Storm took the lead, his powerful form moving with surprising grace through the forest. His eagle senses, honed by years under Shadow's guidance, helped him track the sound. Mist followed, her gentle presence already prepared to comfort the frightened cub. Echo brought up the rear, occasionally calling out with his perfect eagle cry to let Shadow know their location as she soared above. They found the cub huddled beneath a fallen pine, shivering in the morning chill. It was a tiny black bear, no more than a few weeks old, eyes wide with fear and loneliness. The 3 bears surrounded it with the same gentle care Shadow had once shown them. Echo made the soft, reassuring sounds they had learned from their eagle mother, while Mist slowly approached with the patience she used for injured birds. Shadow descended from above, her wings spread wide in the same protective gesture she had used on that fateful night years ago. The little cub looked up in wonder at the sight of 3 enormous bears and an eagle moving in such perfect harmony. Storm gently nudged the cub with his nose, and to everyone's amazement, the tiny bear responded with a sound that was neither bear nor eagle, but something in between. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, a remarkable sight graced the healing cave. 4 bears, 1 tiny and 3 grown, sat in peaceful companionship with a majestic eagle. Their calls joined together in the twilight, a symphony of love that echoed through the valleys, telling all who heard it that sometimes the most incredible miracles are the ones that keep giving, growing, and changing the world one heart at a time. We hope this extraordinary tale of Shadow and her 3 bear cubs touched your heart. If their story of unconditional love and breaking nature's boundaries moved you, we would love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if you found someone in need, even if they were completely different from you? Share your reflections in the comments below. Have you witnessed unlikely friendships in nature? Tell us about them. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us how love knows no boundaries. Like and share this story to spread its powerful message of hope and family. Remember, sometimes the most incredible things happen when we open our hearts to unexpected possibilities. Join our community of nature lovers and storytellers, where we celebrate the amazing connections that make our world truly magical.